Nixon's trip to China in February 1972, the first American president to visit China since it became communist. So that was really the opening, a very important moment in American history, and it was Cold War history too, because both Nixon and Kissinger perceived that opening up to communist China would give the United States an advantage. It would be in the U.S. interest to try to divide the much more formidable, at the time, much more formidable communist power, the Soviet Union and China. And as it turns out, there was some success. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, and in 1991, the Soviet Union was finished. But 1989 was also an important year in China, and an important year for American policy regarding China, because it was in 1989 that future Chinese President Jiang Zemin saw the student protesters going out into the streets at Tiananmen Square. This was the famous Tiananmen Square massacre. American policymakers were watching the whole time. And if they're looking at the Soviet Union, which fell in '89, and Tiananmen Square, also in '89, there's a very obvious difference. The Chinese fired on their own people. In effect, the Chinese were sending a message to American policymakers. You will not do to us what you did to the Russians. You will not shape us the way you think you want to shape us. You will deal with China the way it is, not as you imagine China might be. And that clearly did make an impression on American policymakers. China had asserted its will. After Tiananmen, human rights in China became a major concern for U.S. officials, including the Democratic Party's 1992 candidate for president, Bill Clinton. And yet, pressured by elites in both parties, instead of pushing back, Bill Clinton gave the Chinese Communists its biggest foreign policy win since Nixon's 1972 opening. In 1994, Bill Clinton delinked human rights from trade with China.
Today, I would like to announce a series of important decisions regarding the United States policy toward China. I have decided that the United States should renew most favored nation trading status toward China. This decision, I believe, offers us the best opportunity to lay the basis for long-term sustainable progress in human rights and for the advancement of our other interests with China.
When people talk about the global economy, what they really mean is cheap labor and free trade. The globalist leaders in the West understood that communist China would be the centerpiece of a global economic system. Why? Because of a large, cheap pool of labor under the control of an authoritarian regime. And so in 1994, Bill Clinton's China policy decoupled human rights and trade. In 2000, Clinton granted China most favored nation status in trade. And this led to a key moment in U.S.-China relations, China's 2001 accession to the World Trade Organization. And so, what the West had been dreaming of for decades, this cheap pool of labor would be the centerpiece of this new order, finally became true. What it meant was that people were going to get rich. It was a place for the American establishment to build wealth and power without anyone looking over their shoulder. The U.S. government was signaling that trade with China was more important than human rights in China. America's public health elites took notice as well. Not only was China known for its human rights abuses, China also held a shockingly cavalier attitude toward risky scientific and medical experimentation. Human rights reports abound about China's biotourism industry, that they harvest organs from living subjects, in particular Falun Gong and the Uyghurs, that they kill people to take their organs. The Western political establishment is well aware of these reports.
For over a decade, the People's Republic of China has stood publicly accused of acts of cruelty and wickedness that match the cruelty and wickedness of medieval torturers and executioners. If the accusations are true, thousands of innocents have been killed, to order, having the physical integrity of their beings, their bodies, cut open while still alive, for their kidneys, livers, hearts, lungs, cornea, and skin to be removed and turned into commodities for sale. Doctors killed those innocent people simply because they pursued truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance in the case of Falun Gong practitioners, and lived lives of healthy exercise and meditation that was seen as dangerous to the interests and objectives of the totalitarian state of the People's Republic of China.
China was the perfect place to conduct what's known as gain-of-function research, precisely because it's considered risky. What gain-of-function research does is it genetically enhances biological organisms. And in the case of viruses, it makes them more dangerous. It can make them transmissible or more deadly. The common rationale given for gain-of-function research is that it helps scientists anticipate what deadly viruses might evolve in nature and how they might pose a risk to humans. And so you can see why anyone concerned with public safety and national security would be very careful about funding such research, especially in a country with such lax safety controls. In 2014, the Obama administration imposed a moratorium on gain-of-function research after multiple accidents at U.S. labs. The Center for Disease Control's lab in Atlanta had 2 different incidents, one with anthrax and another with influenza. At an NIH lab, researchers mishandled live samples of smallpox from 1954.
One approach is to engineer into the virus genetically based traits that mimic those that might occur in nature. These so-called gain-of-function experiments are not without risks, however, and have generated much discussion over biosafety and biosecurity issues. I think we all remember about a year ago reading the New York Times article that talked about the doomsday virus. I think that launched us off onto a very vibrant discussion about this type of research. These safety and security concerns are global in scope, and thus any path forward for this type of research must be developed through an international dialogue.
After the 2014 moratorium on gain-of-function went into effect, the controversial research funded by U.S. taxpayer dollars kept on going, but in China. In 2014, Fauci's agency awarded a grant to a company called EcoHealth Alliance to, quote, understand the risk of bat coronavirus emergence. The project was given a 5-year renewal in 2019 and was canceled only in April 2020 after the Trump administration sounded the alarm over the Wuhan lab's potential role in causing COVID-19. Over a period of 6 years, EcoHealth Alliance was given $3.7 million in funding, with nearly $600,000 of that directly funneled into the lab in China. Of course, this was perhaps the country that was most apt to use bioweapons against the United States. And in fact, at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, according to State Department findings, there was a dual-use program at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. What we mean by dual use is it has both a civilian and a military component. In this case, military meaning bioweapons. Intelligence sources say it was obvious that there were Chinese military officers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Some sources say that people wearing military insignia on their lab coats could clearly be seen entering and leaving the Wuhan lab. And that's why this site has raised concerns of diplomats and intelligence officials for years. In 2015, the State Department received a warning from French intelligence that the Chinese were going to kick French scientists out of the lab. The French had basically built the Wuhan Institute of Virology's lab and trained the scientists with the understanding that they would continue to monitor and supervise the lab. So when the Chinese kicked the French out, that should have raised a red flag for Fauci and our public health leadership. And earlier in 2009, then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton asked the French how they were going to make sure that Chinese and other foreign officials who visited weren't going to leak dangerous biowarfare information. And then in 2018, the State Department cabled back from China to the Trump administration, explaining that there were problems with Wuhan lab safety issues. It also alerted Trump administration officials that the lab's work on coronaviruses and their potential human transmission might cause a pandemic. And we now have a paper trail